What's up, guys? Josh Law here with TheCardGuyz, and I'm joined here with ProQuest champion Nathan Crawford. Nathan, I've been doing some wandering around the world. It seems like you've been doing some wandering around decks or heroes.
A little bit. A little bit. We've been bouncing around a little bit lately. We were on Guardian for a few months and then switched last second to Viscera for the PTI event and went pretty well there. And then made a 11th hour decision to play Riptide at a ProQuest.
Yeah, I left you alone for 3-4 weeks, and this is what you do, huh?
It all goes downhill. It all goes downhill.
Oh, man. I knew at Pro Tour LA, I was like, this is a man that is lost and is gonna wander. Kind of like Katsu, but all right, so we have your deck list pulled up here. Now, I'll be honest, my knowledge on non-warrior heroes is limited, and my knowledge on non-warrior, non-meta heroes is limited, but I think that's a good place for an interview. Originally, when we were thinking about, like, okay, how do we make a video for this for the channel, we're like, okay, maybe Nathan could just do a deck tech, but I think it might be more interesting for you guys out there if I kind of interview and kind of ask Nathan about the cards that are here, because I think a lot of people are going to be in kind of like in my position. We don't really know what Riptide does. We hardly remember what his traps do. So I guess we'll kind of just scroll through here. If you guys wanted to take a look at the list, this is what the list looks like. I guess let's start with,
well, before we hop into the list. But yeah, I guess so let's provide the backstory to actually what happened. So basically, we played Viscera at the PTI event, and it was a more aggro-vis oriented list.
Okay.
And so Dromite LL'd, and I remade the Viscera list, changed about 40 cards.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, we're going to take this to the ProQuest.
Okay.
And so I'm just in the Discord talking with Damien and a couple other people, and he's like, "Oh yeah,
that's dangerous.
I was in the local. Yeah, I was. We were talking about, like, he was like in the local area last ProQuest while we were at the Battle Harden in Atlanta. He was like, "Yeah, I played an Azalea here, a Katsu here," and he just kept naming off like Viscera's literal worst matchups over and over again.
Yep.
So I was like, "Oh no, what am I running into?" So a little bit of panic kind of set in. And this was at 10:30 at night, the night before the ProQuest. And I'm like, all right, guys, what's good into all these decks? Azalea, Katsu. He goes, duh, it's Riptide. And I was like, okay, like, I get it. You know, Katsu, you shut his stuff down with like Collapsing Trap, you know. All the traps are always turned on, basically. And then Azalea, as long as you draw a Buzzsaw trap, you pretty much win the game because you literally get so much value off of it. I was like, okay, I'll hear this out. I played 3 games on Talishar. I'm like, all right, Damien, bring the deck. And
you didn't even have the deck yourself. Oh my goodness.
No, well, I mean, I had the cards, but it was too tall of an ask for me to assemble all of them in the same place. So I was like, okay, Damien, just bring a deck box and I'll play it, because he had it all together already. So before we go into the actual list, I have to give credit. I would love to say that I cooked up the whole thing, but that would simply not be true. The deck was 100% constructed by Damien Riggins. He's in the TheCardGuyz Discord as the Mage Master, or I think right now it might be the Mage Crawford. Who knows? Because everybody's last name is Crawford in the Discord now for some reason. And yeah, so he is the artist deck builder behind the list. This is something that he has been working on in the background, kind of, I want to say, for about 1.5 years now, quite some time. And I think with Dromite leaving was like the first opportunity to like really actually take it. Spoiler alert, we didn't play against any of the matchups I was scared of. We didn't play any Katsus. We didn't play any Azaleas. But, you know, we still found a way. We still found a way. So that's how we ended up on the deck. Basically 12 hours before the event, I played 3 games and said, let's go.
Okay, well, sometimes you don't need a lot of reps. Sometimes you just need some raw skill and a good deck list, and attacking the meta. So I did a quick check on Fabry's stats section, and
Mhm.
Dromai was one of the worst matchups in the whole game for Riptide. Literally, I
Right.
think it was like 22% or something like that. So
Mhm.
with Dromai LLing, this list does become significantly better. It still has a few rough matchups. I think I saw Victor was quite
Mhm.
rough. Tech Lovason was quite rough, but Kano was quite rough. But overall, this deck list, I actually had a higher than 50% win rate on Talishar. So, and that's with the Dromai stats. So it's like, okay,
Mhm.
this deck might have some possibilities. All right, so let's jump into the equipment, and I guess let's just go slot by slot. Let's talk about the weapons first, because that's a very defining thing. There's 2 weapons in this list. There's Death Dealer, Azalea's signature weapon, but there's also
Yep.
Dreadbore. Is this Riptide's signature weapon?
No, I think
Does he even
Dreadbore
have
actually
one?
came out. Yeah, his is
Oh,
the
this is Everfest. Yes. Yeah.
yeah, it's Everfest. It was before Riptide ever came out.
Mhm.
I think his is the green one, the token one that we used in draft. I don't even remember
I don't. Dead
Deadwood something. I don't
Deadwood Rumble. I
something
don't.
like
It's
that.
something
I
like that. Okay.
I don't remember, but
Doesn't
nobody
matter.
uses it because
Okay. So
it's strictly worse than Death Dealer,
yeah.
basically.
Okay. So talk me through the weapons. Which one are
So
you
you
using in
have
which matchups? And yeah.
Yeah, so Death Dealer is just your aggro bow.
Mhm.
Anytime that you're trying to attack on the axis of value, you run Death Dealer, right? Drawing a card refunds the pitch. You have the option to take the line of trenching a trap in Arsenal that you may not have had a. Like if you have a trap in Arsenal and they don't present an attack where it'll trigger the trap, like let's say collapsing trap, right? And they don't play attack with go again. Well, then it's just a 3 block, right? It doesn't do anything. So you have the option to trench it away on your turn, then use that resource to load in an arrow with Death Dealer,
Mhm.
which draws a card. So all you're doing in that exchange is just changing that card into another card,
Okay.
which could be an offensive card. It could be another trap that you set, or whatever the case may be. Um, So Death Dealer is just a way to refund value on the pitch, basically. Dreadbore is a completely different story. For Dreadbore, the idea is any deck that wants to run a bunch of D reacts and attempt to fatigue you. What ends up happening, what Dreadbore does, is it forces them to take damage in certain periods of time, right? If you draw 2 Fate for Scenes, they don't really have a choice. They have to take a bunch of damage and then Arsenal one because you can't play D reacts from hand against arrows. And so once they leak enough damage from this happening on the high D react count list, then everything comes in at a breakpoint, and the breakpoint becomes pseudo lethal, and you can actually fatigue your opponent because they're having to block. You pump a 0 cost arrow that comes in for 4, pump it by 3, comes in for 7 with a good on hit. Well, now they have to block 3 cards, right? So you actually win as far as deck damage in that transaction.
Mhm.
You don't have a weapon, which sucks, but that's about as good as it gets without.
Okay. Let me ask a seemingly newbie question, but we're here to learn. So Riptide's hero ability lets you put cards from your hand into your arsenal. So that's one way
Mhm.
to load arrows. So how often are you loading with your hero ability? How often are you loading with Death Dealer or Dreadbore? Are you like, is this mainly just for uh you play a trap and then you can set up an arrow? Is there like, how are you using its hero ability?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different scenarios. I would say as far as like how often do you do one or the other, I would say it's about 50-50. It's a little bit more than you would think. Like a lot of
Mhm.
times when you have like you block down to like a pump and an arrow, you just play the pump, load the arrow, and fire it, right? Because you don't want to pitch your pump to load the arrow to maybe draw a pump. You don't know what you're going to draw off Death Dealer. So it's a way to just completely ignore that variance, right?
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
and you also have situations where you can, like, say we have one copy of Death Touch in the list. You have the ability to, you know, play a premeditate and
Mhm.
then put the Death Touch into Arsenal, which is where it has to be fired from, and then you can Death Touch for 9.
Mhm.
Right? Like that is an option that you do have. And same thing goes for traps. All of the Crucible of War traps in this list, we only run Pitfall, but it has to be played from Arsenal. So you can like block with a trap card from hand on your opponent's turn and then instantly load the Pitfall and then block with it. It is kind of some ideas on some lines that you can take as far as utilizing Riptide's ability. And then of course pinging damage when a trap is triggered is pretty self-explanatory.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Okay, so we covered the weapons. Let's just run through the equipment. So New Horizons. I guess there's only two choices here: New Horizons or Skullbone Cross Wraps. Um,
Mhm.
I guess opting is not super important. Um,
Nope.
Also, I believe. Um, so, so how does this like kind of walk me through like how do you utilize both arsenal slots with this hero?
So it's actually very rare.
Ah.
Uh, a lot of people, because we've been trained via Lexi to know that like New Horizon was
Mhm.
the most important piece of the puzzle when it comes to equipment in Ranger, right? This deck, it's not even close. It's Trench. Trench is like the most important piece of equipment in this deck, and it's not even close. Too many people get hyper focused on New Horizon. In probably 60% of games, it just is a 2 block,
Okay.
like literally. The only exception is if you scroll down the list, you have Heat Seeker in the list. So basically, the most basic use of New Horizon is um, you can hit with your Heat Seeker, which loads a card face up, and then go about your day, right? Uh, and so in 60% of games, I would say it's literally as simple as, oh, I have either seen or played all of my Heat Seekers or almost all of them. Okay, I'll just block with it now whenever I face an on hit, and I don't have an arsenal.
Okay.
I think, and like
Hmm.
most of the time, it is that situation. Now, there are some complex lines, like you can load an arrow, keep it face up, and allow you to double arsenal to push more damage on a bigger turn. That is
Hmm.
something that you have access to, but that is a lot more rare.
I see. Okay. You've mentioned several times that trench is very, very important. So I got it pulled up here. Talk me through why this is such an important piece of equipment and how do you use it?
Well, if you did not have that card for whatever reason, and you arsenaled a trap face down, and your opponent did not attack you, you could not take a game action unless you had E Strike or Scar for Scar. We don't run Scar, but
Or
like,
the new gloves that were spoiled
right,
yesterday.
right. And so, like, if you don't have Rabble or E Strike in your hand, and you have a trap in Arsenal without Trench, you just pass the turn. You have like literally nothing you can do.
Mhm.
But Trench allows you to set a trap, and then say you're playing against KO, and instead of attacking you, they play Cast Bones. You're like, okay, on my turn, trench it out, use that resource to load with bow because now I either draw a card if I'm on Death Dealer or get +1 off of the Dreadbore, and you convert that into some type of value. Usually it's not the same value, but it is translated into an amount of value.
Mhm. I'm looking through the list. It looks like the deck can somewhat utilize a 5 card hand. Like I see E Strike, I see Rabbles, I see all the laces,
Hmm.
um, premeditate, seek and destroy. So looks like if you had a 5-card hand, you would be able to use it pretty decently in most situations. Okay, so also to note, there's just AB1 stapled onto Trench, which is nice. AB1 stapled onto Bullseye Bracers, also very nice. There's not a ton. I guess you run a decent amount of yellows and a couple blues. By couple, I mean 3. So you do have the ability to Arcane Barrier Kano, I guess.
Right.
Okay, so
and you have AB on the gloves as well, so you have access to AB2.
Yeah, let's talk about the gloves. Bullseye Bracers. I think at the moment this is, other than the Steel Blade Shunt gloves. I mean, with Lexi rotating, Bullseye Bracers came back, and both Azalea and Riptide are using this. How do you normally utilize Bullseye Bracers?
It usually comes down to like you have 2 different options in most matchups. Sometimes it's used in correlation with Bolt and Shot as an extender, right? Like let's say you draw multiple arrows, but say not that many pumps. Just firing loading the Bolt and Shot and firing it allows you to just fire one more arrow.
Again.
Right. And so, but in the aggro matches, what I'd love to do is just block down, throw down Endless Arrow with it, and then come in for 5 on hit, goes back to hand and arsenal it. Is one option that I really like doing in the more aggressive matchups. But other than that, it's just like if you have to block down to 1 card, it's a way to still pressure your opponent if you need to do that.
Okay. All right. In terms of boots, there's 2. Looks like you have Snapdragons. You also have Perch Grapplers. I'm guessing you're never actually using the action on the Perch Grapplers. It is basically, do you need armor or do you not need armor? Very similar to Lexi.
It.
Okay.
That is it. I've never activated Perch Grapplers. I don't because unlike Lexi, you can't just flip cards willy-nilly, right? It's very hard to flip a card or have it face up. So it is. I'm sure it's happened before, but it's very rare. It's just, do you need the armor or not? So against Prism, say they're running Erudition, 3 block plus the Perch is like the perfect answer that you want to have those for, and then like Azuri or something like that.
Sure. Okay. The only equipment piece we haven't talked about is the Quiver of Abyssal Depth. Tell me about this card. Is it just there? I remember in
3 more arrows.
Yeah, I guess it's just 3 more arrows. It's like 1 card out of your 80. Is there a world where you don't run this and you pick up an 80th card? Because I know there were some Lexi lists that were tempted to do that.
No, because like Lexi had the option to use Rustling Leaves as the default quiver. The problem with this deck is you don't have any blues. You literally have the 3 legendary traps as your blues, and that's it. So like playing that quiver just does not make sense. Whereas this one, it's just Remembrance, and there's a lot of decks that they default to the idea of fatiguing you, and that just lets you throw 3 more arrows with 3 more breakpoints in.
Okay. All right. So there's 8 equipment / weapons, and there's 72 cards in the main deck. How do you want to approach talking about these? Do you want to break it down into like arrows, pumps, traps? Or is there
we can break it down in that fashion. So as far as the arrows go, you of course have Bolt and Shot. That's just a staple. Against Guardians, you kind of need to like line that up with Rain Razors and kind of get that over the top value in case because most people will try to fatigue you. Anybody that has a bunch of 3 blocks in their deck, that is like what they will default to because they're scared to interact with the traps. And so you have those is just turn extenders basically.
Yep.
If you ever have like 2 pumps in your hand and you have 2 arrows and one of them is a Bolt and Shot, you have an amazing line of play the pump, like pre-med, load the Bolt and Shot, fire it for 7. It doesn't matter if it hits because you play the second pump, load the other one that might be a drill shot or something, and then fire it, right?
Mhm.
You don't need the reload, and you can kind of structure it in that way.
Yeah, I've always been like thinking of Ranger as in like you have to use your bow to get things into
Mm-mm.
arsenal. Whereas Riptide, a lot of there, I guess there's a lot of different lines that you can take with pump arrow, pump arrow. Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you run the reds and the yellows. The next arrow is drill shot. Just a
Yep, and
solid
you're
zero
just
for
trying to
4.
chew through. It's as simple as that. There is no other 0 for 4 that has like a as good on hit, right?
Mhm.
Chewing through armor. God knows where there's a lot of armor in the format right now, and more to come. So having that force the armor out is always
Mhm.
good.
And I believe that the aim counter in this deck list is completely irrelevant, right? There's no
Yeah,
way.
there is no possible
Okay.
way to give a card a name counter.
Okay. All right. Next, we got Endless Arrow. This is, if you played during the Lexi era, you know that this is a snatch that draws snatch. Pretty good.
Yeah, it's just an on hit.
Okay.
Another reason to run it.
Mhm. Okay. Then we got Falcon Wing. This is the arrow that has go again. So you don't have Voltaire to give you go again. This is one of the ways that you can go somewhat wide.
Yep, and I just realized that we made one change to this list when I registered it for the ProQuest, and what I did was I actually changed one of these Falcon Wings into a release the tension, which is the +3 pump that says you cannot play a D react from Arsenal.
Mhm.
That was
Okay.
the only change that I made. I made it like really last second, and so you can choose to do either one, whatever you prefer, really. But the Falcon Wing is once again just another way to set up for bigger turns. It's something that you can park in Arsenal, and it doesn't matter. You're not forced into trenching or anything like that. If you draw a Rain Razors, you're guaranteed to get 4 value off of it at a minimum.
Okay. I see you have a single copy of Fatigue Shot.
Yep, it's just a hedge a little bit for
For
the
Guardian.
brutes and the Guardian. Yep.
Okay. I guess let's talk about this. So the Bolton Shot's 0 cost, Drill Shot's 0 cost, Endless Arrow's 0 cost, Falcon Wing is 0 cost, Fatigue Shot costs 1. And then
Yep.
Heat Seeker also costs 1. So was there I guess you trying to balance it out 50-50, or is there a slight preference
Well, we
towards?
also have Merkmeyer Grapnel as another 0 cost.
Mhm.
So it is slightly favoring 0 cost, but and the reason for that is if you look at the deck list, there's just not a lot of blue and yellow cards.
Right.
Um,
And a lot of these yellows
so
you want to play. So
right.
yeah.
So anytime that you have the 1 cost, they're there because the on hit effect is so good, you kind of just have to run it on a value basis.
Mhm.
Those arrows become more and more important in the later game when decks are trying to fatigue you. Like I mentioned earlier, anytime you start throwing breakpoints with damage on hits, like Infecting Shot and Heat Seeker, technically because you get extra cards, it you start trading 1 card for 2,
Mhm.
which when you run a high deck count plus the Remembrance bow and a Remembrance, you can start actually fatiguing your opponents.
Mhm. Okay. So you already talked a little bit about Heat Seeker. Heat Seeker has on hit draw card,
Yep.
which is pretty good. This was also used in Lexi quite a bit. Infecting
I will
Shot.
say, never play that card if your New Horizons is gone. Because if it ever hits and a trap lands face up off the top of your deck, you cannot take a game action unless your opponent attacks. So don't do that. do not do that. If
Interesting.
you do not have New Horizon, do not send that card no matter what.
Okay. Okay, so you Infecting Shot also. Why is this a 2 of instead of a 3 of?
Um, It's really, I mean, I guess you could. It's fighting for the fatigue shot spot. So if you wanted more infectings, you could just take the fatigue shot out and add a 3rd infecting.
Okay, sure. All right, the next arrow is Merkmeyer Grapnel. This is a very rare effect. Is this mainly because it's a 0 for 4 arrow, or is it more that you actually care about the damage prevention, can like damage dealt by this cannot be prevented?
Both. So
Both.
in
Okay.
in 90% of matchups, it's like the first arrow that you block with, like almost always.
Mhm.
But it single-handedly uh, won me a match against Prism because I was running Dreadbore into the Prism, and I had a Murkmire in Arsenal, and I was kind of playing a little bit slow, kind of blocking a lot or whatever. And I was like, wait a second. I drew a double pump hand and like a couple traps, and I said, okay. They throw a Herald. I was like, let me leak a little bit of damage so they'll flip Erudition, and then I'll just yeet the the Murkmire at him for 10. And if one damage goes through, it clears the whole board of Ward.
And
Uh,
the Prism deck doesn't generally block for 12 very easily. They don't have armor, so.
they drew Soul Shield,
Uh-oh. And that
and
doesn't work.
they couldn't play it because of
Mhm.
Dreadbore. So it literally cleared
Mm.
one Spectral Shield and Erudition and dealt 5 damage.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
pretty good. It was pretty
Mhm.
good. So that's the reason.
Yeah.
That's the reason.
Do you remember back in Outsiders Draft, we would see this card like, why are we drafting this card? It's LSS put this card for Dusk Till Dawn.
Just to beat Ward.
Yep. All right. The next arrow is Remorseless.
So this arrow in combination with Dreadbore says no D reacts as long as it's placed face up. So you do have to load it in with the bow. You can't, because Riptide loads the arrow face down.
And there's no way for you to flip it like Lexi does.
Exactly. And also to note, one little key thing, Trench only allows you to send face down cards to the bottom of the deck. That's a very important piece there. But Remorseless, in aggro matches, it's great, like against Ninja or something like that. Or even Azalea, this card's amazing against, because like it says, okay, it's going to like deal 10 damage to you because you're trying to go pump, pump, pump arrow. You're going to take 4 damage doing that. Or, or they block it and you're happy with either of those exchanges. So just a good arrow with a good on-hit effect that also combats fatigue.
Sure. Very, very solid. Next arrow is Searing Shot. On hit, more damage, comes in at breakpoint. I guess a lot of these arrows are basically borrowed from the Lexi list. Yeah. The good arrows are good.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's
okay,
it.
So I think that actually covers all the arrows. So it looks like you have 6, 9, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21, 24, 27, 30 arrows. So exactly, well, you have 72 cards here, but you have 30 arrows, which is a good amount. Okay, let's talk about the pumps, I guess. Or I guess let's talk about the other attack actions that are not arrows. So you talked briefly about the Death Touch, how there's some cute things that you can do by using the hero ability to get it into Arsenal.
So the main point of Death Touch existing is it being a Codex target. So you have the ability to just, you can pitch a yellow to activate your bow to no effect. Have one floating, you can Codex and then play Death Touch. Or you can trench your arsenal that you couldn't play, play Codex, you have one floating, Death Touch, right? Really, like, it's a good card, but it blocks 2. And you don't need the popper density anymore. Half the time you're blocking Prism's Herald anyway. You don't really need to pop them. So,
yeah,
Codex is really the reason.
That's actually there's 2 points I want to talk about. You said that you're normally blocking Prism. I'm looking at the defensive value of this deck. I mean, other than the laces and things like a few of the pumps and Rabble, this deck blocks pretty decently. There's a good
Yep.
amount of 3 blocks. Also, I wanted to ask you for Death Touch, are you normally creating a Frailty, Inertia, or Blood Rot?
That just depends on the deck I'm playing against and the game state. So
Okay,
that
sure.
there's no Blood Rot is like your safe option. You will always get 2 value from that token, no
Mhm.
matter what, either via a card that they pitch or technically it's always the lesser value, right? So you either get a dead card or 2 value
Mhm.
is basically because your opponent's just going to pick whatever's higher EV for them. So whereas frailty and inertia, it depends on the game state, but you're kind of guessing on those, and it depends against the decks you're playing
Sure.
against.
Okay. We got 3 copies of Enlightened Strike.
So as you mentioned, where we had 30 arrows, there are some matchups where you run a lot of cards. I'm not going to say exactly how many, but like there are some matches where you play a decent number of cards, and you need half of your deck to be something you can attack with, right? And that's where Death Touch, E-Strike, and Rabble kind of come into play. Is no matter how many cards you run, at least half of your deck is an attack.
Mhm.
Kind of
Okay.
like the Rune Blade ratio.
Mhm. Ah.
Yeah.
I get you there. Okay. The other attack action card I saw was Rabble.
Yep. Just a 0
Is
for
it
4 because
is it
we run almost all reds.
okay? All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And
Uh
it's a non-pump that loads an arrow.
mhm.
So if you have that in Endless Arrow, you Rabble for 4, throw it into Arsenal,
Mhm.
and then send to Endless Arrow.
This this is actually a very, very interesting point because arrows by themselves
Or above rate.
are overrate. But the
Yep.
balancing act is that you have to load them into the arsenal to fire them. But Riptide says, hey, you played a red card? Sweet. Get a free load.
Yep.
Interesting. This also takes me this is going back real far, Nathan. This is before you played, I think. Do
Oh
you
wow.
remember Redliner? The bow that
Uh
costs 0 and would load an arrow.
and yep, I do.
Yep. Very, very old school. So there was a red line Azalea deck in Blitz a long, long, long time ago. That was decent. So yeah, that's basically like we said, the arrows are overrate, and Riptide's ability kind of it's very difficult when you look at his hero ability, like how am I going to extract value from it? Well, you're extracting value from the arrows that get put into Arsenal for free. So
Yeah, so the greatest misconception about, I don't want to say Riptide because you can build Riptide in a bunch of different ways, but this is an aggro deck. I don't care how you cut it. This is an aggro deck that happens to block really well. Like imagine if I ran
sounds like Burn.
uh like imagine if Blaze Headlong had an on hit block 3 but lost the conditional go again. Well, that's Riptide, right? Like you're playing the preconditional card of a pump or something, loading that 0 for 4, and then firing it, which every single time, with the exception of Murkmire in most matchups, will have an on hit in some shape, form, or fashion. So you're basically playing very, very efficient Fi that has less chain links, and you also extract value above average on defense. However, that is very conditional.
Interesting. Okay. Let's continue to talk about the cards of the deck. So we talked about all the arrows, we talked about the Death Touch, Eat Strike, and Rabble. I guess let's continue with the offensive theme, then we'll talk about the defensive cards. So in terms
Mhm.
of pumps, the first one that I'm seeing is the laces. So we have Lace with Blood Rot, Lace with Frailty, Lace with Inertia.
I mean, once
did
again, comparing to Phi, imagine if
you're 0 for
your
3 go
head
again.
jabs. Yeah, imagine if your head jabs had on hits.
Yeah.
And you could apply them onto something that had an existing breakpoint to carry over the breakpoint. I mean, it's just better math is all it is. It does create inconsistencies, right? Because you have to pair it with an attack, right? Whereas head jab is just always a head jab no matter what.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, you are paying an opportunity cost, but there's a lot of upside.
Okay, so I don't think there's much that needs to be said. You're running the rainbow, not rainbow, but the red, green, and blue of this.
Yeah. Pre-med is the GOAT in this deck. It just does. I mean, I've done everything from playing pre-med, throwing at E-Strike and Arsenal and E-Striking for 10. Like, just because it comes from Arsenal, right? So it applies. And I've done, and then like 10 is like an insane break point. And then so it's 10 draw a card, basically, because you get the ponder token if it hits. So you can just create a lot of pressure by combining in like seeking inertia and seek and destroy is better in this format than it has ever been. Because so many people are either trying to put DBX in Arsenal or play 5-card hands or set something up. So like, and then Frailty is also way better than it's always been because warriors are running around.
Warriors,
and so like just these specific hit effects are just a higher value than they've ever been. And you also have the option in a lot of lines to layer the on hits, whereas Azalea puts it all on one 90% of the time. I don't want to say all the time because you can always like snap and then
bullseye into something.
Bullseye, yeah. But like in this deck, you can do it almost every turn. You play like, let's say you play a pre-med on a red Bolton shot. Okay, so you have 7 on hit ponder, but then you held back a lace with inertia and a drill shot. And then so it doesn't even need to hit. Let's say they block it, then you're like, okay, cool. Lace with inertia, drill shot. Here's another 7 break point, and oh yeah, I still get my ponder token if it hits.
This reminds
it gets
me
disgusting.
This reminds me a little bit of Lexi. Like it's like, okay, this first arrow is not the end of things, and the second one could have quite a bit of on hits. Yep. Okay, so we got the laces, we got pre-med. The other pump that I'm seeing is Seek and Destroy.
Yep, I think we run 15 pumps.
Yep, not counting the Rain Razors, but yeah.
Yep, and I ran a 16th. Like I said, I took 1 Falcon Wing out for release attention.
Sure.
That is just a perfect personal preference thing.
Okay. The other, is there anything you want to talk about for Seek and Destroy? If not, we can move on to Rain Razors.
No, it's just a good effect.
Good card is good. Okay. Okay, Rain Razors, you got 2 of them in the deck list. I guess this is generally paired with Bolton Shot plus Bullseye Bracers.
Yep. It's something that it's a yellow, so you can pitch it very easily, get in the second cycle, use it on big Codex turn, something along those lines. It's one of those flexible cards. I would hedge against playing it in some matchups where it's really important to be blocking. Because like it's not as, because you don't have Voltaire, it's not as easy to get 4 value out of Rain Razors. It does require either something lining up pretty well or you like forcing it to happen. It very rarely just accidentally happens. Unlike Lexi, where the minimum is 4 and it's pretty easy to get to 6
or even 8 before Bullseye Bracers was banned. I guess the only particular combo that you want to is like in terms of values, you can push through a Blood Rot Pox. So maybe you can get 6 value out of this card. Okay, so I guess that's all of the offensive cards. Let's talk about the defensive suite in this deck. The first card that I'm seeing is Frailty Trap.
Well, we talked about warriors, right? Frailty's good right now.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another thing. We got a lot of Prism walking around right now. And guess what every first Herald has? It has Go Again. And if they have an Angel, a Herald, or, an Erudition sitting in the background, not attacked yet, and they throw a Herald first, and you play that Frailty Trap and you ping them, if they don't have a way to instantly, create a spectral shield some way, shape, form, or fashion, you get the whole Angel because it's going to trigger the ward because you dealt the damage. So, and that's also important to note with Bloodrot Pox as well, where that effect will also trigger the ward if they do not pay for it, and they really value their blues. So,
yeah, Frailty Trap. This card is extremely strong, and I'm just thinking about every single Bolton attack is triggering everything in this deck.
All warriors. If you play a warrior and you're playing like a traditional list that's not like Decimator, whether it's Raiden, whether it's dual wield, no matter what of the three warriors you're,
no matter which
one
are your four. Hey, there's four. What are you talking about?
Oh yeah. Which of the four you're playing, it literally does not matter. You are going to trigger every single trap in the deck. You have Pendulum if they've activated reaction. Guess what? You're doing that all the time. Pitfall is going to trigger no matter what. Tar Pit, your attacks should have Go Again if you're doing anything at rate or above. Same thing for Frailty. Inertia Trap, you are pumping your stuff. That's normal business. So like, and then I got stories over the weekend for the legendaries. Yeah. Those things are absolutely cracked and single-handedly won 2 games. Not even close.
Let's quickly just like count how many D-Reacts we have here. So we got 3 Frailty Trap and Inertia Trap. That's 4.
Yep.
Pendulum Trap 5, 6. Also mills a bit. Pitfall Trap brings it to 8, and then Tar Pit Trap brings it to 11. So Tar Pit Trap actually is much better than it looks, because a lot of decks and strategies rely on the attack action cards hitting. For example, Whelming Gust Wave, Bolt of Courage, Command and Conquer. Well, you can't play this against Command and Conquer, but yeah.
So the deck's basically operating on like a 15 trap, 15 pump, 30 attack,
12 good things.
and then then you have just like good fillers.
Codex and
like
buddies.
Codex, Remembrance, Rabbles, E-Strikes, and Death Touch, right? It's kind of like the ratio that the deck's built around.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about these legendaries, and then we'll talk about Codex and Remembrance. I think that'll cover everything. So for those of you who don't know anything about Riptide and have a bad memory, well, you're going to have a very bad time against Riptide. Basically, as soon as you see the position of these 3 cards, you need to remember where they are, and you need to know their effects. 100%. If right now you cannot tell me what these 3 traps do, you are not prepared.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I'd say 85% of people cannot tell me by memory what these 3 traps do.
Yep.
I'm part of the 85%.
Let's start with Buzzsaw. So this card actually won me the finals. So I was playing against a KO.
Just in case we have people that are just audio listening, let's read the card. So 0 cost blue, Ranger Defense Reaction Trap, blocks for 3. It's a legendary Riptide specialization, so you can only have 1 in your deck. It says, when this defends an attack with greater than its base, The attack cannot gain power this turn. Its attack becomes his base. Sad day for Dawnblade Dorinthia.
Yep.
And pummel.
Yeah, it's just an instant. It's just an instant block 3. You can't do anything, basically. So it auto wins that matchup. Same thing for Azalea. If they triple pump, you can just say, I'm gonna take all those pumps and make them nothing. And so what happened in my finals match was I was playing against the KO. They chose to go second, as they should, and they swing claw. And I'm like, okay, he's gonna discard a wind up. So he discards a mighty wind up, makes 2 might, and then goes cast bones.
Yep.
And so he has 8 mites and agility. And so it goes to my turn, and I still have like almost a full grip, right? And so like I overpitched to load a 1-cost arrow because I'm like, okay, I need to increase my odds of either drawing Collapsing Trap or Buzzsaw Trap. So I need to like make sure that I get all the cards out of my hand in Arsenal, whatever, to increase the odds. And so I overpitched, and I drew red card, red card, red card, and the last card was Buzzsaw.
Nice.
So if I didn't overpitch, I wouldn't have drew it. And I just blocked 3 and Buzzsaw, and it just chopped all 8 value off of the card. He sent like I forget what it was, like a wild ride for 6 or for 14.
It'd be even more
said,
insane
okay,
on a Bear Fangs.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, block 6, take 0. And he's like, well,
that's pretty good.
And it deals a damage. Don't forget about that.
Oh,
and it deals a damage. So that one card, that one block interaction, if you were to tally it up, the card physically blocked for 11 damage because it canceled out 8 mites, blocked for 3. So it blocked 11 damage and pinged. So it was a 1-card 12.
You don't see that every day, guys.
You don't.
You don't see that.
And you think that one's good. It's not even the best one.
All right,
the next one. Let's go to the next one.
All right, so Collapsing Trap is a 0-cost blue pitch ranger defense reaction trap, blocks for 3. It's also a legendary Riptide specialization. It says when this defends an attack with Go Again, the attacking hero discards their hand, then draws that many cards -1. All their plans ruined. And it's a pummel, basically. Lose a card, and all your plans are messed up.
So this card got more value than I've ever gotten out of a single card in Flesh and Blood.
Okay.
I was
very...
Okay,
Sonata Arcanix is a lot of value. Yeah. Are you sure?
This was more. This was more. So I was playing against Missouri. This was round 1.
Okay.
And what happened was the prior turn I played Seek and Destroy Codex, got like a 0-cost error and just threw 7. So I blocked my whole hand and then made that play. He had like the GOAT Azuri hand, right? He had with Codex, he put an Isolate into Arsenal, which cancels out the Frailty because you swap out the cards and it's no longer from Arsenal, right? So he had Shakedown in hand, Shred in hand, Red Shred, and a Ravenous Rabble. So, like the perfect hand, right? You rabble, then you play the Isolate, and then you flash in the Shakedown. Even if I block, you shred it. And you get to pick a card from my hand, which is probably like my only arrow, and you just like time walk me, right? So it had like the best hand on the planet, as far as Azuri is concerned, other than Codex. And he goes, Ravenous Rabble. I said, Collapsing Trap. So he discards
his whole
hand. He discards the Shakedown and the Shred and draws an E-Strike. That's his only card in hand. He cannot play the E-Strike.
Cannot pitch for daggers.
And he's under Seek and Destroy.
Oh man.
So it blocked 3, dealt a damage, and prevented a Shakedown Shred transaction. Which, if you add all of that up including the card he picks out of my hand and all of that, it's approximately 24 value off of one card because he couldn't even arsenal the E-Strike. It was just discarded because of the Seek and Destroy on hit from the turn prior. So it literally, that one card in that one situation got literally 23 to 24 value.
It's pretty good.
Not bad. Not bad.
All right, let's talk about the final legendary trap. We got Spike Pit Trap, 0 cost, blue pitch, Ranger defense reaction trap, blocks for 3. It's a legendary Riptide specialization. It says when this defends and the attacking hero has played or activated a reaction this chain. I already don't like this. Put the top card of their deck into their graveyard. Then they lose X life, where X is the number of cards in their graveyard with that name. So at least X will be 1.
Yep. So
and it's going to ping as well. So at least 2 damage.
Exactly. So a lot of people are like, how do you beat Decimator Axe Warrior with Riptide? And the answer is cards like Spite Pick Trap, Pendulum Trap, and things like that. Because in the late stages of the game, they don't have any more like go again cards, but they do have like blue overpowers and stuff like that. So you just pitch these, you keep pitching them. And which is very easy to do because you have Dreadbore, so you're just like loading stuff up and like doing that. And then there's going to be a point in the game where it's like 4-4.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually what happened in one of my 3 practice games before I played it the night before. I played against a Decimator Bolton, and literally he was ahead by all measures, like on deck count, everything. And then he played the overpower, and I was like, bet. Spite Pit Trap, Pendulum. So it mills 5 cards off of his deck. So now I'm ahead on deck count, and it dealt 3 damage and then milled a Shunt, which he had 5 of in the grave, hit him for 6. So it literally dealt 9 damage on one attack because he played a reaction.
Yep.
And like, so you can close a lot of games out in that manner. What it really does is it gives you, it allows you to play in a lot more grittier lines, because like you should know that he has a blue overpower at that point in the game because you're so late if you're a good player. So if you're playing any other deck, you have to say, oh, I know he has blue overpower in here, so I need to block 2 cards to stay alive. Well, Riptide, you're like, I'll block 1 card, and if you try to kill me, I'm going to kill you. and that just, in some matchups, it becomes a situation where math does not matter. Mm-hmm. It draws a line in the sand, and it says, if you step over this line, you will lose the game. And they just can't, and so math starts going out the window a little bit, and it starts becoming who can create the situation to where I can't do that. And if you cannot do that, I just win the game.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to be honest, all 3 of these traps seem absolutely terrifying. And when we started this discussion, I did say that as soon as you could pinpoint the position of these traps, you need to memorize where they are, in addition to knowing their effects. So hopefully if you've been listening the last 15 minutes, you now know Buzzsaw Trap, Collapsing Trap, Spike Pit Trap, and what they do. Okay. Specializations are good.
They're not bad.
let's talk about Codex of Frailty. This is a card that we know how powerful it is, but talk to me a little bit about how Riptide uses this card compared to how Lexi and Azalea use this card.
So for Riptide, it's strict, like 90% of the time, it's going to be block down your hand to only pumps, and you just go pump Codex and grab your best arrow. So you're basically just playing Codex for the value. But what it does allow you to do is in some situations, because we run so many versions of like inertia trap and like so many ways to give inertia or seek and destroy and stuff like that, there's a lot of situations where if you ever force them to discard, they might not actually get value on the card they put in their arsenal because it'll go away via inertia or seek and destroy if you can have enough pumps on it. So 90% of the time, it's strictly just like a value play, but it's also a yellow that pitches to load.
I'm no I'm noticing some things. So you said like typically how you're going to play this card is pump codex.
Yep.
This is very ranger-esque. This is how they defend themselves. Obviously, they're not going to two block your stuff. They're going to say, I take it. Here's some on hits and value damage, right? So,
Yep.
Yeah. So this reminds me a lot of how Lexi and Azalea like to defend themselves. Very on theme. Okay. The final card is single copy of Remembrance. What are you trying to get back with Remembrance? If you had the whole deck at your disposal, what would you grab?
Codex.
Okay. Yeah,
But
Codex, good value.
yeah, other than that, some other like if you've been through a lot of your pumps, right?
Mhm.
And you understand the ratios and you're like at a certain point in the game, like let's say you still have 30 cards in your deck, but you only have like 5 pumps left. Well, maybe Codex isn't the best choice you have, right? Maybe getting some pre-meds or some lace with blood rot is your better option, right? So really it is, situational. The one thing I will say is when you're activating either the bow or remembrance, check your graveyard and make sure how many of each arrow you have in your graveyard because you don't want to take death touch, put it back into your deck, and then play Codex and it not be there.
Mhm.
So you
Okay.
always want to have one premium 0 cost, one premium 1 cost, and then remembrance and quiver based off of those. You need to leave one of each. So you always have like a premium target for Codex when you stumble on it.
I think in terms of anti-fatigue, the highest damage ratio would be E-Strike. Is that
Um
true?
actually it's actually whatever arrow has the better on hit. Because E-Strike the downside of E-Strike is if you have Dreadbore says only arrow cards gain defense reactions can't be played from hand.
Mhm.
So if you load up Dreadbore in a certain matchup and you E-Strike, that is an opportunity for them to get their Fate for Scenes and Sink Blows out of their hand and
Sure.
not leak damage. But if somebody's trying to fatigue you and they put a Lace with Blood Rot on a drill shot, you're going to get 2 to 3 cards anyway. So granted,
Sure.
that is 2 cards out of your deck, but if you're late enough in the game, that could easily get 3 cards, which
Mhm.
using 2 cards to get 3 cards is the same thing as using 1 card to get 2 cards. Kind of. But it is in a sense that you only have 3 ways via the 3 E-strikes to get 2 cards with 1 card.
Mhm.
You're still trading up 1.
Sure. Okay. Very, very interesting deck list. Is there any general tips and tricks you'd like to give the people at home? If
Um,
if
as far as like
if I was to bring this to Aniston and embarrass myself, what would you tell me? What would be some tips you would give me?
I would say do not bring it if there's going to be a lot of Prism. Kano's a rough matchup.
Victor.
Decimator Axe is hard and Guardian is hard. They can be won, but they're just difficult. But everything else is actually like pretty decent. You don't mind seeing it. But the biggest thing that I would recommend is if you have a trap. My biggest mistakes over the weekend revolved around one thing, and it was I was getting too greedy with my traps. So as an example, I would play it against the Tekla Damien, the person who actually built this deck. I was playing against him. And he swung Tekla Leveler, and I had Collapsing Trap. And he had 2 floating and 1 card in hand. And I was like, I could Collapsing Trap this Tekla. But then, like, I wanted to save it for a later point because it was early in the game. I wanted to save it for like a later point to where he like had Singularity in his hand or something, and like me get more value from it. Because I don't even get the card out of his hand. He can just pitch to activate Teklo, even if it's a red, and I don't actually get him to discard the card. So I still get the damage and I block the damage, but I don't actually get the quote unquote card out of his deck, which could or could not be important. So I held on to it. Well, then he played CNC.
Oh no.
So the card in hand was CNC. In my hand was Collapsing Trap, Pump, and Codex and Arsenal. So I literally had to like trench block 4 and take 2 damage in pass turn. Because I couldn't give up the threat density of giving all 3 of the pumps. Because it's a lot of threat density in the Teklo matchup. So whereas if I just would have played, it's the one matchup I lost over the weekend. And I think it was because of that play. He says he thought he 100% died because that went from a 0 damage turn, or went to a 0 damage turn from literally triple pump Codex into a death touch because I could have pitched the Collapsing Trap to load the bow. So like we're talking a difference of a lot, and it was still kind of a close game. So
interesting.
If your opponent is playing a card and your trap is turned on, I won't say every time, but a lot of the times, just get your value. Because if the trap's turned on, it's going to block 3 and you're going to ping them. So you're going to get 4 value off of the trap. Just go ahead and get it. Don't be greedy with it.
Yep. That's basically Sync Below Fate for Scene math, so take it.
Yep.
Or Sigil of Suffering for you Runeblade fans out there.
There you go.
A little bit more. Sigil of Suffering is actually a little bit more, right?
Technically, it's 4 and 1. It's technically 5.
Yeah. Runeblades are just OP. Their math is just higher than everything else. All right. Okay. So we've been going for about an hour now. I think this is we covered the deck in pretty great depth. Any final words, I guess, for the people at home?
No, I mean it was a fun deck to play.
This deck looks pretty fun. I have to admit.
Yeah. If you love like aggro decks with like very situational defensive options, it's like the perfect deck. You even have a little bit of a fridge, believe it or not, because like it's not the end of the world if you give up New Horizon. So you have like access to like 4 good block if you run Perch. Trench is the last thing you block with every single time. Don't give that up.
Trench you literally block when you're about to die, right? Like
I would almost die with Trench. Like that's how important it is.
Okay.
Like if
take it to the grave.
If it was one of those situations where like you give Trench to like play around a reaction and go to 1, I'm just gonna say, look, if you got it, you're killing me because I can't live without it.
Right.
So like
okay.
You just keep it, you know.
I see.
It's so important. And yeah. So if you are I don't think Trench is like super expensive, but like if there's anything that you're changing about the deck based off of like a budget restriction, the answer is not Trench. That is something that you have to play no matter what. It is not an option. I think it's only like a $20-$30 card. It shouldn't be too terribly high.
Sure. Okay. Is there any cards you want to talk about that you might try out in the future?
I don't have enough reps on it to really come to those conclusions. I think there is
the tension card.
Yeah. Release the tension is one that I'm a real big fan of. Also, don't be afraid to tailor the traps to your local meta, right? Like, let's say you don't have a lot of reaction heroes in your meta, right? And so you don't need like pendulum trap, right? And maybe you want to throw in some more inertia traps, right? Like, don't be afraid to like play with those a little bit. Feel free to try it and like localize it, if you will, to
Yeah.
your local meta, especially for pro quest season. I do not recommend that at like a battle harden or a calling level event because you're just kind of like metagaming yourself. But
Let's
yeah,
quickly break down how the traps are categorized. They're basically when an attack has go again, when an attack has greater than its base, and when a reaction is played. So
yep.
there's a whole matrix of different ones. So go find the ones that suit your meta.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I guess this wraps things up. Thanks for joining me, Nathan. Thanks for answering all my newbie questions. This deck looks absolutely terrifying from a conceptual standpoint for every single deck that I play. So that is not good.
Yeah, it's
I might
really
have
good
to
into
really pick up
warrior.
Kato.
Yeah, it's like really good into warrior. It's really good into Katsu, Azalea, stuff like that. So if that's your local meta, it's even good into KO because if you think about it, KO also turns on every single trap
Yep.
except for the
Might
reaction ones.
tokens, agility tokens.
Yep.
Yep.
So everything is turned on and like the right buzzsaw or collapsing trap, like I explained, you just win the game off of
Yep.
drawing a blue, which is we don't hate
I
those.
want to ask one final question before you leave. Is this a deck that once people understand it more, play against it a bunch, is this a deck that gets significantly worse? Kind of how I like to talk about how I don't like bringing Dawnblade Dory to really high level events. Is this a deck that kind of is like, I'll be blunt, is this a noob stomping deck?
You lose some points, I'm not gonna lie. I don't think right because there's so many people that will like load up 66 cards and like try to fatigue you or whatever, and they just don't understand how the deck's gonna win. Uh, but I think that goes for everything in Flesh and Blood, right? You get a couple more reps into everything, you know what they're trying to do, and you get win percentage points for that, right? I don't think this is any different. I don't think it's drastic, right? Because you could say, okay, I don't want to play into your collapsing trap. Well, then you're giving me value by not playing your hand in the optimal way that you would have otherwise, right? So either way, collapsing trap is giving me value, whether I resolve it or not. Now, I think the percentage that you lose playing this deck from going forward is, like you said, people are going to see the blue pitch strip on a trap card and go, I see that card, and I'm going to understand where it is at and play to it. Whereas they otherwise would have said, oh, Riptide's a meme. I'm just going to play my hands and go.
There is one counter to that. It's Remembrance does shuffle your deck. So keeping
Not
track
only
of
that, I didn't show anybody my legendary traps. I always trenched them. So it was always the trap that I would put in Arsenal. And if they didn't play the card that or the situation that turned it on, up, trench death dealer. It's just an easy way to keep that information hidden. And because like if you resolve a premium blue trap to its effect, it could just be game winning.
Yep. They're very, 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 very powerful. Okay. All right. I think that kind of wraps up things. For those of you who want to try the deck list, it is in the description. Go have some fun. All right. This has been Josh Lau and Nathan Crawford with TheCardGuyz. Hope you guys have a good PQ weekend.
Take care, everybody.